be a very dynamic conversation. And before we get to the introductions, I want to do a couple of more housekeeping matters. Although this is a live event right now, it is being recorded and it will be posted to the NAACP's YouTube channel, and more information will be following. If you would please make sure that you type any and all questions in the chat. That is going to be the best and the only way in which you can communicate your question to us. Before we get to the introductions, I also want to give a little bit of context for the conversation that we're going to be having this evening. So in King County, there are 53, if my memory serves correct, Superior Court judges. And the Superior Court judges have a wide array of responsibilities. They deal with issues of criminal matters, civil matters, which are essentially disputes between private parties. They also deal with issues around family law issues, custody, and in the non-business hours, they also perform weddings as well. Little known fact, but it is true. So with that bit of context and understanding the important role that judges have, let's go ahead and start with introductions. And we're going to start with introductions for Department 30. And that is with Mr. North and with Ms. Ladd. And before we join you all this evening, we flipped a coin and Ms. Ladd was the winner. And so she has chosen to go first, and she has 3 minutes for her opening statement. And one more thing, panelists, you see there's a square in your screen that says timekeeper. However much time that you have, when there's 30 seconds remaining, there will be a yellow card that shows up in the timekeeper spot. And when there's a red card, that means that your time is up. And you will be allowed to finish your sentence as long as it's not filled with semicolons, commas, and other sentence extenders. So with that being said, 3 minutes, Ms. Ladd, the floor is yours.
My name is Carolyn Ladd, and I'm running for King County Superior Court Department 30. And I would really like to thank the NAACP for having us here this evening. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm running against a judge who's been on the bench for 20 years, and I want to start out by telling you why. Judge North was sanctioned by the Commission on Judicial Conduct for saying that Black people were more likely to be gangsters than white people. I was listening to KUOW this morning, and I heard that there is a backlog of 6,000 felony cases in King County Superior Court. And I think the question that King County voters have to ask themselves is whether or not they want Judge North to be the person hearing those cases. And let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I have been serving as a pro tem judge, which is a temporary judge, both in Kitsap County District Court and in Seattle Municipal Court. I attended the Judicial Academy at the National Judicial College in Reno, Nevada, which is the national college that trains state court judges. I have been rated exceptionally well qualified by 2 independent bar associations. I'm proud to be endorsed by the first African-American woman justice on the Washington Supreme Court, Justice Helen Whitener. I've also been endorsed by the first openly LGBTQ justice, Mary Yu. I'm endorsed by retired Supreme Court justices, Bobby Bridge, Mary Fairhurst, and Faith Ireland. I've also been endorsed by 9 Democratic legislative districts. I'll read them to you because I can't remember. The 1st, the 11th, the 34th, the 36th, the 37th, the 39th, the 43rd, the 45th, and the 48th. I'm also honored to have been endorsed by African-American civil rights champions, including former King County Councilman Larry Gossett, attorney and founder of the African-American Bar Association, Attorney Lem Howell, and I'm also endorsed by the first African-American president of the Washington State Bar Association, Ron Ward. I'm running to bring a new and more inclusive voice to King County Superior Court, and I hope that when your ballots are mailed to you on October 14th, that you'll vote for me for Department 30. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. North, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank you, the NAACP, for hosting this forum tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks. I've served the people of King County for 20 years as a Superior Court judge. I'm proud to be endorsed by over 115 current and former judges of the state Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and trial courts throughout the state of Washington. I've been endorsed by 7 Democratic organizations and 4 unions, the Boeing Machinists, SEIU, the Iron Workers, and Protect 17. I've also been rated exceptionally well qualified by 8 bar associations. The pandemic has caused an enormous backlog of court cases, and the court system is rapidly adapting to this. We've set up Zoom trials and seen an astounding increase in jury participation, allowing for more diverse representation of King County residents. I'm the only candidate in this race that has 20 years of experience in handling complex legal issues, such as serious criminal cases, family law matters, and large civil actions. The people of King County cannot afford to have an inexperienced judge handling this backlog of cases and learning on the job. As a lifelong Washington State resident, I raised 2 children with my wife, Lori. Over the last 35 years, I've actively sought to protect the environment while enjoying hiking, biking, and river rafting. Before I was elected to the court in 2000, I spent 23 years representing ordinary people in court. I fought and won for the mom not awarded enough child support for her and her kids, the unemployed worker denied unemployment insurance, and the homeowners who fought a private power company against the arbitrary condemnation of their land. And the only candidate in this race that has fought for individual clients and upheld their rights in court. As many of you know, I've received an admonition from the Judicial Conduct Commission, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. But I think it's important to address racial and social justice. The King County Court is working to eliminate the rules and policies that perpetuate institutional racism by having a disparate impact on people of color. Part of that effort is reducing the number of people we hold in jail. As chair of our local rules committee, I proposed changes to our rules on pretrial release to require that people accused of nonviolent crimes be released on their own recognizance unless they pose a threat of violence, witness intimidation, or flight. We will take up these proposals at our October 7th meeting. Proposed changes would also allow judges to set an alternative to bail bond. These changes would allow many more people accused of crimes to be released pre-trial. Systematically working our way through our rules with an eye to social justice will make our legal system work better for all of the people of King County. Thank you.
And now we will turn our attention to the introductions for the candidates for position Department 13. And it appears as though Ms. Matson has joined us, and it seems as though there was a calendaring issue where representatives in the NAACP may have sent a couple of different times for the start of this event. And so that's my understanding why Ms. Matson wasn't here at the very beginning, but she made it in time for introductions. So I'm going to turn to Ms. Robertson first for 3 minutes of an introduction. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Craig. I'm Andrea Robertson, and I'm running for position 13, which is an open seat on the King County Superior Court. Thanks for having me tonight. Being an effective judge in our Superior Court requires significant trial experience, and I have 22 years of that. I attended the UW Law School, where I had a particular focus in trial advocacy and mediation. I competed in trial and appellate competitions, and one of my favorite parts of law school was teaching at the Rainier Beach High School in the street law program. I liked it so much that I continued to volunteer with the Seattle Public Schools after law school. I've spent 22 years in our courts. I've represented over 1,500 individual clients in times of crisis, facing sometimes the scariest moment of their lives. For my first 2 years of practice, I was a public defender. I then spent a decade working in criminal defense firms, and for the past decade, I've operated a law practice with my husband. My primary focus has always been zealous advocacy on behalf of the accused, both juveniles and adults navigating the criminal justice system. But I also represent petitioners seeking protection orders in cases of violence and harassment. I've been sole counsel in over 50 jury trials. I've argued at all levels of our state courts, including our state Supreme Court, regarding police dash camera footage. I'm a part-time instructor of advanced trial advocacy at the University of Washington School of Law, and I've lectured on trial practice and criminal defense to lawyers from across the state. My decades of teaching will be valuable to help me provide clear, straightforward communication to all who appear before me. Over 75 trial court judges and hundreds of attorneys who try cases in our courts have endorsed my candidacy, including James Bible, the former president of your organization. These folks personally know I have the skill, experience, and compassion it takes to serve our community on this important court. I also have the support of labor organizations, including the sole endorsement of the Teamsters and the Amalgamated Transit Union. I've been evaluated by all of the bar associations who provide judicial evaluations, and I've received the highest possible judicial rating of exceptionally well qualified from 5 of those organizations, including Washington Women Lawyers, the Cardozo Law Society, the Latino Bar Association, the Veterans Bar, and Q Law. Because I've worked in public and private defense, civil and criminal matters, I know that our system can improve. In the short run, as you've heard, there's an unprecedented backlog of trials due to the pandemic. Before COVID, between 10 and 30 jury trials per day were held in the King County Superior Court. Now that backlog is many thousands of cases, and many defendants have waited months for their day in court. Because of my experience, I'm qualified to start from day one, helping my fellow judges deal with this backlog, balancing due process with health concerns. And in the long run, our system must address inequities which disproportionately impact marginalized populations. As a criminal defense attorney, I've fought for access to justice for my entire career, and now I'm prepared to bring that passion to the bench. It's very important that this spot be filled by a nonpartisan, compassionate, and most of all, experienced judge, and that's why I'm running. I look forward to answering your questions, and I hope I will earn your vote.
Ms. Matson, you have 3 minutes to provide an introduction. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I do apologize for being tardy. Today is Yom Kippur, and so I haven't been checking my email today, and I didn't take notes of the new time. So I do sincerely apologize for my tardiness. My name is Hillary Madsen, and I'm running for the King County Superior Court, position number 13. As a lawyer, I've had the opportunity to take cases to trial in civil and in criminal matters. I've had the opportunity to go to appeals. I've had the opportunity to represent my clients in the state legislature. More than 85 judges, including the incumbent judge, Teresa Doyle, have endorsed me in this race. But my experience isn't the only reason that I'm running. One of the worst experiences I've ever had in a courtroom happened about 2 years ago. I was in the courtroom when a man was brought in. He was in shackles, his arms, his legs, shackled to his belly. And he was shuffling up to the bench, and the judge proceeded to grill him whether he could really afford to pay $5 or $10 a month to satisfy his legal debt. A legal debt that was related to his mental illness, that was related to his poverty, that was related to his homelessness. And in that moment, where you have the judge and the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney and the bailiff and the clerk and the court corrections officers, you have all these people weighing down on this man for $5 or $10 a month. The salaries of the people in that courtroom would have wiped out this man's legal debt. As an attorney, I have focused my career on people who can't afford to pay for lawyers, for children and youth, for people who are incarcerated, for immigrants. My work has had impact. Some of the constitutional arguments that I've been proud to make include challenging solitary confinement against our kids in King County, reforming our juvenile record sealing laws to strengthen them so that kids get a second chance, and investigating abuse against detained immigrants at the Northwest Detention Center. My work has had impact on addressing systemic inequities in our legal system, and it's time for me to take that impact to the bench.
Thank you. And let's begin now with the questions. And again, I'll remind folks who are watching this event live, please type in whatever questions you may have in the question answer chat function, and they will be fed to me, and I will incorporate the questions into this conversation. So again, the ground rules are, I'll start with asking the candidate a question. They have 2 minutes. The next candidate in that cluster will have 2 minutes, and then there'll be 1 minute response, and then we'll go to the next cluster. So let's go back to position 30, candidates for position 30. Since we started with Ms. Ladd first, the first question will go to Mr. North. And the first question, which will be the same for all candidates, is as follows. What do you understand to be the mission of the NAACP, and why is that mission important to the criminal and civil justice system? What do you understand the mission to be of the NAACP, and why is that mission important to the criminal and civil justice system? And the clock will begin, Mr. North, when you start speaking.
Okay. I understand the mission of the NAACP to be that of making sure that all folks in our country are treated on an equal basis. And that, of course, has been the thrust of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is because all too often we have acted in our country as if Black lives didn't matter. And that's the whole point, is to get folks to recognize that Black lives do matter. It's central to our concept of democracy and the way our civil and criminal justice system work, that everybody is equal before the law. And that's why we need to make sure that our system recognizes that, and that people truly have an opportunity to be equal before the law. That requires making sure we eliminate all sources of institutional racism, where we have policies or procedures that may be neutral on their face, but that because of the way they're applied or because they stratify people on the basis of income, end up having a disproportionate impact on people of color. And that's what we need to do, is systematically examine all of our rules and procedures and make sure that they're not having that effect. That's what I was talking about in terms of bail reform as being one part of that. There's a whole lot of things that have to be done. That's one piece of the puzzle.
Ms. Ladd, you have 2 minutes.
I think, as the name implies, it is for the advancement of African American people. I think we have to recognize that we have 400 years in this country of discrimination against people of African descent. People started to be brought here in 1619 against their will, and people were enslaved. And I think that we see the vestiges of that history today. Folks didn't stop being enslaved in 1865, right? Then we had Jim Crow, we had the civil rights movement. It's really been 400 years of trying to advance people of African descent, for people to truly participate in a full and meaningful way, be that employment, housing, voting, social justice, fairness in the criminal justice system. I think the NAACP is involved in all of those aspects, and I think the work is as important today as it was when it was founded. I hope that the Black Lives Matter movement has brought that mission of race equity and social justice into more people's consciousness, into their living rooms, through television. I see so many Black Lives Matter signs as I'm out and about, and I hope that is a sign that there will be meaningful change. And I see something happening with the timekeeper, so I'm assuming I'm out of time.
So the yellow means you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, thank you.
I will return back to Mr. North. You have 1 minute if you choose to say anything else on this issue.
No, I think I've said what I had to say. Thank you.
Ms. Ladd, any further response?
No, just that I really appreciate the mission of the organization, and I appreciate that you have included judges in your campaign forums this year, because I think the justice system is such an plays such an important role in society and in social justice. And, you know, historically, African-American people have not been treated fairly in our justice system. If you look just in the state of Washington, I think African-Americans make up 4% of the population, but 18% of the prison population. And I think we need to look at why that is and what can the court system do, what can judges do to end institutional and systemic racism.
Candidates for position Department 13. We will begin with Ms. Madsen. What do you understand to be the mission of the NAACP, and why is the mission important to the criminal and civil justice system?
Thank you. So I understand the mission of the NAACP to be advancing the rights of all people in increasing equality in the areas of our political system, our education system, and also in our justice system. And I understand the mission of the NAACP is to eliminate race-based discrimination for all people. This is incredibly important. Racism is the #1 barrier to justice in the United States today. We started with a Constitution, baking racist principles into our Constitution. We have the forced enslavement of Black Africans. We have the genocide against indigenous people. We have the Chinese Exclusion Act. And we have recently the redlining that happened and continues to happen in neighborhoods in King County and across the United States. And we have mass incarceration. So this is a problem that continues to persist. And the mission of the NAACP is incredibly important in bringing to light issues that are preventing people from accessing their opportunities in court. And so, for example, we see problems right now in our cash bail system, which is racially disproportionate. We see problems in our jury selection pool. There was a study done by the University of Washington recently that in King County, 64% of the time, you would have a jury without a single Black person on the jury. And we see that in our legal financial obligation system. So what I talked about in my introduction, this problem of folks being assessed legal debt that they can't afford to pay, which has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. So that's my understanding of the advancement. And I think, I apologize, but the timekeeper is, I thought I saw something and now I don't see anything.
Right, they'll hold up the yellow card, which means you have 30 seconds remaining. And now there's the red card. So if you want to finish your sentence,
all right.
Please finish your sentence.
Okay, I don't actually see the person. So that might be my problem as my speaker view. But this is campaigning in the time of Zoom. So we'll just have to have grace with everyone. So as I said, the purpose of the NAACP, what I understand the purpose is to be, is equality of rights in every area, every place that decisions are being made, to make sure that we're not discriminated against people based on the color of their skin.
Thank you. And Ms. Robertson, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. I also understand the mission to be the elimination of disproportionate impacts on persons of color and the elimination of race-based discrimination. And I think more recently, there's been a renewed focus on engaging in actual anti-racist behavior. The act of simply acting in a race-neutral basis is simply not enough. One must act to affirmatively advance anti-racist principles. I think that the approach and the mission of NAACP is particularly important in the criminal and civil justice systems, particularly when you look at our incarcerated population. Washington has had an increase in incarcerated persons, even though there's been a decrease in crime, and that disproportionately impacts persons of color. In terms of the United States overall, our population has 13% Black men, but they are 35% of those incarcerated. 13% Black women, but they are 44% of those incarcerated. To eliminate that disproportionate impact in our criminal justice system needs to be our aim. I see this firsthand in my own practice. I've represented persons who are stopped and detained solely based on the color of their skin. If you heard the circumstances of the stop, you know that it would never happen with a white person. Most recently, I represented a gentleman who, when been pulled over for a small traffic infraction, held his hands out the window to show that he was unarmed, and that brought immediate law enforcement response. with guns drawn, and he was arrested almost immediately. There is also a disproportionate impact on the civil side of things, which should be top of mind for judges who are working both in dependencies and family law court. Children of color have a higher poverty rate. 12% of white kids live in poverty, but 39% of Black kids live in poverty throughout the US. 26% of foster kids are African American, according to the 2012 census, even though they are only 14% of the population. These things need attention and insight, and judges need to be conscious about constantly engaging in anti-racist behaviors.
Ms. Madsen, you have 1 minute response if you choose to use it.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that I'm proud of the work that I did at Columbia Legal Services to highlight the disproportionate number of children in our homelessness response network who are children of color, to highlight the disproportionate number of children of color in our juvenile legal system, and to highlight disproportionality that exists in our child welfare system, in our foster care system. These are places where oftentimes we think about the courts as simply repeating a problem that exists in society, but the truth is sometimes our courts are creating the problem.
Ms. Robertson, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. One thing that I think has brought me a little bit of comfort is that this renewed focus on Black Lives Matter and this increased amount of public discourse about these problems have already led to some changes. For example, just in the last week, the Seattle Municipal Court has eliminated all probation monitoring fees for everyone. And we know that that has a greater impact on communities of color who have less economic resources available to deal with the day-to-day matters of court. It's only going to be worse as folks are recovering from this pandemic, and it's up to judges to be conscious of these constant impacts on our society and to be able to see where it impacts persons of color to a disproportionate degree.
The next question is going to go for the candidates for seat 13. And the question will go to first Ms. Robertson. What have been your contributions to the African American community in King County, Washington?
I believe that every day that a criminal defense attorney goes to court to fight on behalf of the accused, it more often than not is going to impact those folks who are receiving a greater impact from the criminal justice system. In terms of the job of a criminal defender, it's always to fight and to find justice. And sometimes that involves attacking police for their conduct. If you are to go to court in order to pursue evidence as a law enforcement officer, you have to do so without racist motivations in your detention of an individual, because we know that persons of color are detained more often than white people. They are arrested more often, they're charged more often, and their sentences are more harsh. It's the job of defenders like myself to point this out to judges and to also try to affect change in my zealous advocacy. My job has also included calling out strikes in the jury selection process that are race-based in nature. And I will tell you, the first time I initiated a strike against a prosecutor, or a challenge against a prosecutor for her strike of a person of color off a panel, it was an uncomfortable moment. She told me afterwards she thought I was calling her a racist, but it was my job to point out that there was not really a true reason for that person to be stricken other than the fact that they were a person of color. And I believe the last person of color who was available on the veneer. It's an uncomfortable job sometimes, but a defense attorney has to engage in that process. And I'm rather proud that some of the recent decisions by the Washington State Supreme Court have strengthened our ability to make challenges like that and come before the courts and allow for the resources of the courts to call out that racism and to eliminate as much as possible the impact on persons of color.
Ms. Madsen.
Thank you. I've been honored to work with community groups like Village of Hope and Fights and Epic on issues that are disproportionately impacting our communities of color and our African American community. Some of the work, to give you an example, that I've done, particularly when I was at Columbia Legal Services, where I was representing children and youth and people who were in detention, was on extreme sentencing of youth. And so in King County, we were one of the drivers of something called auto decline. Auto decline is when a young person is charged by a prosecutor with a certain crime. And because of that crime that they've been charged with, they're automatically transferred into our adult court. There's no judge that stops and reflects and looks at, what really was going on in this young person's life. So they're automatically tried as adults, and they're automatically then, until the work that we did to confront the use of solitary confinement and extreme sentencing, put into an adult jail where they were in solitary confinement. So they would not be in sight and sound of adults for 23 hours at a time. And so what was interesting in doing that work is that King County was one of the drivers of auto decline. And in fact, in King County, there were some years, because of the pressure that we were able to put onto the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office at Columbia Legal Services, a report was produced that said in some years, over a course of 5 years, only children and youth of color were being tried or charged as adults.
Ms. Robertson, you have 1 minute response.
Sure. Aside from my work in court, I can tell you one other way in which I feel as though I've contributed to the African American population goes back to my time in law school. When I was teaching street law at Rainier Beach High School, and I walked in the first day, my team partner, we taught in pairs, and I were the only white people in the room. And when we taught these kids, who were phenomenal kids, we got to sections like emancipation of a minor, and they knew firsthand what that was about because some of them had already begun that process. When we ended the course with a mock trial, there were several kids who just stood out as superstars. And one of which, her name was Jolynn, I pulled her aside and I told her to seriously consider law school. She hadn't even given a thought to college at that point. I continued to stay in touch with her as she went through college. She went on to law school. She actually became a prosecutor and was my opponent in court. She called me her mentor, and I hope to be able to reach someone else in that youthful stage where I think that they're most impressionable and they know that they can make a difference in the world. And so I feel very privileged to have had a role in that progression for that young woman's life.
Ms. Madsen, you have 1 minute.
I think I've said what I needed to say. Thank you.
I'll now turn to the candidates for Department 30, and we'll begin with Ms. Ladd. What have been your contributions to the African American community here in King County, Washington?
I'd like to talk about 3 different pro bono volunteer organizations that I've worked with. The first is the Partnership for Youth Justice. I serve on the Renton Community Accountability Board. That is a diversion program of the King County Superior Court for juveniles. Young people who have been accused of offenses have the opportunity to come to the Community Accountability Board. They come with a responsible adult. They're interviewed together, they're interviewed apart. The board talks to the young person about what happened and who was harmed and what did they learn. The board then comes up with a plan for that young person. It might be an apology letter, it might be community service, it might be restitution. And then if the young person meets those terms, they do not end up with a criminal record. And I think that's so important that young people not end up with a criminal record and be branded in a way that's going to impact their ability to get jobs, to get into college, whatever they might want to do in their lives. So that would be the first, the Partnership for Youth Justice. The second is I'm very passionate about formerly incarcerated people having second chances in employment and housing. So I have written about that. There's an article on my website, CarolynLaddForJudge.com. And I volunteer with the King County Bar Association Records Project to help people get eligible criminal convictions vacated so that they can truthfully say on an application for employment or housing that they have not been convicted. And the third thing I'd like to talk about is that I volunteered at the King County Bar Association's Renton Neighborhood Legal Clinic, which has since been taken over by the Lauren Miller African American Bar Association. And working there, I helped a wide variety of people who had civil legal problems. And I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Mr. North, you have 2 minutes.
Sure. One of my major focuses of activity in the Bar Association has been serving on the King County Bar's Ethnic Diversity in the Legal Profession Committee, which has worked to promote the diversity, ethnic diversity of the bar and the bench. We've raised money for scholarships for people of color to go to law school and get a legal education. Also worked on getting people who are people of color in the bar to think about becoming judges. I helped transcribe and put together the materials from the first workshop that was done for attorneys of color thinking about becoming judges back in the early 1990s. It's important to have the bar and the bench reflect our society and have all different ethnic groups involved in that. And that then leads to a greater perception of equality and fairness in our legal system. And certainly it's important to consider a lot of the things that the other candidates have mentioned in terms of the impact that a lot of these different things have on people. One of my standard practices has always been, for instance, to waive all non-mandatory financial consequences in criminal convictions, except in those rare cases where I know the defendant has money. Occasionally you have a defendant who has money, but that's unusual. Except in those cases, I always waive non-mandatory fees because those disproportionately impact folks of limited means, particularly people of color, and make it extremely hard for them to get back into a productive society after they've paid their debt to society.
Ms. Ladd, you have 1 minute to respond.
I've never heard of that committee, and I've been on forums like this with Judge North at least 15 times. He's never mentioned it before. I'm very involved in the King County Bar Association, and I've never heard of that committee. So I don't know if he's speaking about a committee that he served on some time ago, but I've been a member of the King County Bar Association for at least 20 years, and I haven't heard of that committee. So I guess my question is whether that's a recent service or whether this is something that happened some time ago.
So it's not, again, it's not a debate. And Judge North, you do have 1 minute to respond. You can choose if you want to respond to the question or deliver a 1 minute response as you see fit. But again, this is not a debate, and the intention, as made clear at the beginning, is that there was to be no back and forth of a debate, but I'll let you respond how you choose to, Mr. North.
Okay. It's very much an active King County Bar Committee, and I served on it for, I think, 15, 20 years. I haven't been on in the last 5 years, but it's been an active part of the King County Bar Association, so I'm surprised that Ms. Ladd hasn't heard of it. But it's been an important mission of the King County Bar, and it's been one of the central missions of the King County Bar Foundation to raise money for minority scholarships, and that's been one of the things the King County Bar Foundation has raised money for many years.
I'm going to turn the attention now to the candidates for Department 30. And this is a question, there are a series of questions that have come in from the audience. And I'm looking at a theme, and I'm going to take the theme of the question and generalize it a little bit. In the introductions for, and this question is specifically at Department 30 candidates for now. In the introduction of both the candidates, you each mentioned a sanction or an admonishment. And the questions that I'm paraphrasing here from the audience is, how is it essentially that the community can have confidence in a judge that's been sanctioned for whatever reason? Why is it that the community should place their confidence in a judge with previous sanctions? Again, I'm trying to generalize it for whatever the reasons are. And I'm going to go to Mr. North first and then Ms. Ladd.
Okay. Well, I was very upfront in addressing the issue when the matter of my inappropriate content comment was brought to my attention. it was in the context of a murder case in which the victim, Precious Reed, was African American, and there was an issue about whether messages that had been found on his cell phone, text messages from some guy we know as only as Charisma, who claimed to be OGs with Precious Reed and to have the Reed owed him money, and that threatened Reed if he didn't pay him back. And so I had to analyze the issue of whether those text messages would be introduced at trial, and I excluded them, but in the course of doing so, suggested a connection between race and whether somebody would be a gangster or not. I deeply regret having done so, but once it was brought to my attention by the commission a year and a half after the hearing in which it occurred, I immediately acknowledged the inappropriate nature of the comment. Gladly took the training the commission offered. Went on to do additional training and reading in the area and materials from the National Center for State Courts on how to avoid implicit bias, and have incorporated specific practices into my regular routine to make sure that implicit bias doesn't become part of my decision-making process, by asking myself if my decision would be the same if the ethnicity of the person involved were different, or if the gender identity of the person was different. For instance, in a divorce case, would it matter if one switched the gender identity of the parties as to what kind of a decision would be made with regard to child custody? And so those are the kinds of things that somebody can do in order to make sure that that doesn't become a problem in the future.
Ms. Ladd.
The Pew Research Center did a poll in June of 2020, and 87% of Black people who were polled said that they felt that Black people were treated less fairly by the criminal justice system. And so to answer your question, but not violate the debate rules, I don't know how communities of color can have confidence in a judge who was sanctioned for making a racially biased statement. And we need to do what we can to eliminate systemic and institutional racism, to gain the trust and confidence of communities of color, but also to make sure that they really are fairly treated. So perception and reality of fair treatment and equal justice under the law.
Mr. North, you have 1 minute, if you choose to use it.
I think I've already said what I have to say on the subject. Thank you.
I'm going to transition. I'm going to turn to the candidates for Department 13. And I'm also going to ask the same questions of the candidates for Department 30. The first question is going to be presented to Ms. Madsen. And the question is, I'll just ask very directly, what is your position as relates to the Black Lives Matter movement?
Absolutely. So the Black Lives Matter movement, what is my position? I support the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, I think to me, when we're talking about people in the street chanting no justice, no peace, that's a powerful statement about the lack of confidence that people have in our community about our legal system. You know, it's a lack of confidence that's been created by institutional, systemic, and individual acts of racism. And as I said, the courts don't just reflect back on our social problems. Our courts sometimes create these problems. And so when we're talking about the cash bail system, when we're talking about jury selection, when we're talking about the prison to school pipeline, you know, I have a client whose younger brother was expelled from preschool. We have deep systemic inequities in our legal system. And my hope is that the Black Lives Matter movement is bringing those inequities to light, and they're offering an opportunity to for each of us to challenge our own rules in creating those inequities.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you. My opinion of the Black Lives Matter movement is that I support it wholly and completely. And I actually am very happy to see that it's become a greater topic of conversation in our community. I think we all need to be conscious of the ways in which persons of color have been oppressed for many, many years. And I think it's incumbent upon us to educate ourselves in ways to eradicate that. I've spent a great deal of time looking not just at how to improve myself personally, but also to look in terms of what type of fixes need to be made. And I've looked at it with a lens towards how a judicial officer can serve this role better. And the case of Breonna Taylor brings to light the multifaceted issue itself. There needs to be so many changes with our system, some of which are legislative, some of which are societal, and some of which are judicial. In terms of the judicial aspect of the Breonna Taylor tragedy, for lack of a better word, I've looked at how the judge who authorized the search warrant did so without considering whether there was a particularity to the area being searched, did so with broad sweeping generalizations regarding these drug dealers always have cameras and will always react in a particular way. The trial court judge who signed the warrant to allow for that action to be taken, which directly led to her death, is only one example of the ways in which this blasé attitude of simply rubber stamping the way things have always been done are going to ultimately cause tragedy to persons of color. And it's something that we all need to be waking up to now and in the future.
Ms. Madsen, 1 minute for a brief response, if you choose to use it.
Yeah, and I want to give an example of confronting a systemic bias in our legal system. So one of the things that I worked on was strengthening our juvenile record sealing laws, because in Washington, our juvenile records were open to the public. And I was able to be a part of a team where we were able to work with academics to come up with data to show that there was racial disproportionality in the way that our juvenile record sealing worked. I was able to partner with community organizations to be led by clients to go to the state legislature and insist upon changing our laws. And I also had the opportunity to lobby our judges because we needed to then implement these laws and to create protocols and procedures that would make our juvenile record sealing more fair. And so judges have these opportunities all of the time in our procedures, in our rules, in our courtroom culture to dismantle the systems of oppression that we've created.
Ms. Robertson, 1 minute if you choose to take it.
Thank you. One of the other ways in which movements like the Black Lives Matter movement have drawn attention to the inequities that have existed in our system has been an increase in the standards that are needed for strikes in a jury selection process. And just in the last year, Justice Cheryl Gordon McLeod authored an opinion which gave clear guidance to attorneys who wished to challenge the strike of a person of color from a veneer, which is a panel of potential jurors, in articulating some of the past reasons in which the state has justified striking a person of color and calling them out specifically as thinly veiled racism. For example, claiming that they didn't keep eye contact with the prosecutor, or that they had prior law enforcement contact, or they didn't trust police, or they lived in a poor neighborhood, or took public assistance. That those were only thinly veiled reasons to strike a person of color from a jury. And I'm very happy to see the decisions that have come down to strengthen the ability to eradicate that type of racism.
Candidates for Department 30, Ms. Ladd first. What is your position on the Black Lives Matter movement?
I wrote an article about what the Black Lives Matter movement means to me for the National Women's Political Caucus. And as I said in that article, Black Lives Matter is very personal to me because my husband is Black and my stepdaughter is Black. And so my husband's life matters. My stepdaughter's life matters. They live in this world in a different way than I do. I experience white privilege on a daily basis. And through their experiences, I see the world differently. And I'll give you a small example of that. My husband keeps the registration to the car on the visor, which drives me crazy because when I pull the visor down, it falls in my lap. And I said to him, why? Why is the registration on the visor? And he said, because if I get pulled over, my hands have to be visible. And I can't lean over, I can't dig anywhere, I can't open the glove compartment. I have to be able to get the registration. And I see I'm out of time.
Mr. North.
Well, I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement because it's an essential part of our democracy that Black Lives Matter. I'm hopeful that we're at a point in our history where we're actually going to make significant progress on eliminating the racism that has permeated our society for the last 400 years. It takes both a consciousness raising of the public and the day-to-day work of going through all of our procedures and rules and checking to see if they do have an institutional bias that constitutes institutional racism and correcting those things. Both of these things are essential. Neither one works by itself. The consciousness raising, I think, is occurring because of the enormous social movement that's taken place over the last few months. And it may seem trivial, but you kind of know it's getting there when even the sports guys are starting to talk about the importance of Black lives and are talking about it and when they're broadcasting soccer games or basketball games or the football games. And the work that needs to be done to make sure that the consciousness raising has a lasting impact is going through and systematically dealing with the different rules that impact folks and making sure that they don't perpetuate institutional racism.
Ms. Ladd, you have 1 minute.
I participated in a Black Lives Matter march with my husband and my stepdaughter, and it gave me hope. There were people from all different racial groups and ages, genders, religions. It was really a coming together of people saying, we have to value Black lives. We have to acknowledge that unarmed Black people have been killed by the police, like Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd, and people coming together to say, no more, no more. So I am hopeful that the Black Lives Matter movement is going to make meaningful and lasting change. I certainly hope so.
Mr. North, you have 1 minute.
And I think we've covered it pretty well, but I am also hopeful that this is going to be a major turning point in our history and that we're going to have significantly less racism from here on. Certainly, I don't expect that anything's going to happen that's going to make it automatically go away right away, but I think we've turned a corner and can make significant progress on it.
So for the next several questions, I'm going to abandon the 1 minute rebuttal. And so I have a follow-up question to the question that you all responded to in terms of your position on Black Lives Matter. So in 1 minute, and Madam Timekeeper, if you can give a 30-second warning, in 1 minute, everyone here on this panel has confirmed that they are in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. What have you specifically done to show your support for the Black Lives Matter movement, that which we all agree we're in support of? And we'll go in the same order in which the questions were answered. 1 minute, and we'll start with Ms. Matson. And Madam Moderator, I think you have to unmute Ms. Matson.
Thank you so much. So I attended the Black Lives Matter movement protest on the 30th of May. This was the protest where the crowd was tear gassed and flashbang grenades were used. I also participated with my synagogue in a follow-up protest with the Black Lives Matter movement. And at home, I have 3 children, 6, and my son is 6 and my little girls are 3 years old. And we have been talking a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of recognizing that differences exist and that in some cases, because of those differences, people are treated in ways that are unfair.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you. I think during the course of my career, I've walked the talk to the point of pointing out when there's racial disparity in terms of policing conduct. I think that's part of my job, and it was always part of my job and something I was happy to do. More recently, I have kids as well, and we've had a lot of very significant conversations about the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's really important for my kids to recognize the importance of what's going on right now and to see how our society has labored under this racism for as long as it has and how it needs to improve. I think it's critical for us to talk to young people about this now and to make sure that they are brought up knowing what's right and wrong in regards to issues of race.
Candidates for position 30. Same question. We'll start with Ms. Ladd. As you both articulated your support for the Black Lives Matter movement, what have you personally done to show your support? Ms. Ladd, 1 minute.
As I mentioned, my husband and I and my stepdaughter, we walked in the West Seattle Black Lives Matter March. And my stepdaughter, has participated in a number of protests. And I have to tell you that as parents during COVID-19, it was challenging to know what to do about that. She was protesting almost every day. And I did what I could, which was I got her masks, I got her eye goggles, I got her a t-shirt, I got her signs. I made a backpack for her, to send her out as a young person trying to change the world and trying to support her in the best way that I could, because I think that this is the moment and this is the time, and I hope that she will grow up in a more tolerant world.
Mr. North, 1 minute.
The Black Lives Matter movement has caused me to have a number of very significant conversations with colleagues and other folks that I know about the different experiences we all have. Certainly one of the most striking ones was with a colleague who mentioned to me that when she and her husband bought a home in a new community and moved in, she asked the local police department to conduct a security check. And of course, her purpose in doing so was not really to get security check, but rather to make sure that the local police department knew that there was an African-American couple living there, that the husband frequently came home from work late at night and driving his BMW and playing rap music. And this wasn't a reason for the police department to immediately think there was something sinister going on. And that's both at the same time appalling and very understandable given the history that our society has had of racial attitudes and the way in which the police have viewed things, that's necessary to do that. And it was a very eye-opening conversation for me.
During the course of our conversation this evening, there's been words tossed around: institutional racism, promoting anti-racist behavior. The question that I have for each of you, and we're going to start with the candidates for position 13. The question I have is, as a judge, what are you able to do to address those things? We're talking in platitudes now and in theories, but as a judge, if elected, how would you be able to address those things that you've talked about, institutional racism, promoting anti-racist behavior? And we'll start with Ms. Robertson. Again, you have 2 minutes and there will not be a 1 minute follow-up.
Thank you. I think what's important to recognize about the role of a judge is that there's not an ability to make legislative changes, and that's both frustrating and appropriate. We would be a third branch of government if I'm seated, and thus my role is limited to what I can do as a trial judge. I cannot make proclamations like the Supreme Court. I cannot change statutes. So my role is limited to what I can do as a trial court judge. But there are many things that can be done from the basis of sitting as a trial court judge. One is to look at cash bail, and that's to address the reasons why cash bail has become synonymous with the type of charge that's in front of the judge and not going into what is actually the intention of Criminal Rule 3.2, and that's to look at whether the person is a flight risk and whether they're likely to repeat a violent offense while the case is pending. Too often, when someone is facing an allegation that has not been proven and they may have some prior history, which is most likely attributed to growing up oppressed, then cash bail is set, which effectively keeps that person from being able to come home and work to feed their family. It heightens the chance that they'll accept a plea bargain that they don't wish to take. So as judges, it's extremely important to look at alternatives to cash bail in order to keep this oppression from this method of having a person continue to come back to court. Other ways in which judges can improve the racist aspects of our system are to look at ways in which the sentencing of a defendant who is before you is impacted by the fact that they are a person of color. There is discretionary sentencing, in which you can exercise your discretion in determining what the sentence should be. And then there's non-discretionary sentencing. And what's important is even in those non-discretionary sentencings where your hands are tied by the legislation, it's very important as a sentencing judge to make a public statement about how your hands are tied and how you wish you could exercise that discretion. That's the only way to see change happen, is to make your voice be heard from the position as a judge.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. And Madam Moderator, you'll need to unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely believe that judges have a role outside of their courtroom to address racism. And let me give you an example. So the Superior Court Judges Association is an association of all of the judges in the state of Washington. And the Superior Court Judges Association has a legislative action committee. And this legislative action committee proposes legislation to the legislature and comments on legislation that's being considered by our legislature. And so, for example, when I was endorsed by Representative Noelle Frame, she was really excited because she said, you know, Hillary, we have judges who are coming down to Olympia who are telling us that the only thing they can do to keep our kids safe is to put them in jail. In addition to the work that you can do to influence legislation, to recognize inequities that are being created through legislation that's already been passed, judges have a role as ambassadors. And so, for example, when I was at Columbia Legal Services and we represented EPIC to try to stop the construction of the youth jail, it was such a lost opportunity, a missed opportunity by our judges to be in community, to talk to folks who are directly impacted by the construction of a youth jail, to understand their perspective, and to make modifications to our own planning. It was a missed opportunity. The other thing that I think that judges should be doing is community service. As a judge, you have to have multiple perspectives. You know, I come to the court as a white woman with a lot of privilege. And so it's so important for me to be out in our community, to be visiting folks whose families are impacted by our child welfare system, to be visiting folks who are incarcerated, who are impacted by that system, so that I can understand the multiple lived experiences that people have. So when, as a judge, I'm called on to make a credibility determination, or I'm asked to understand what a reasonable person would do, I have multiple perspectives.
Candidates for Department 30, we'll begin with Mr. North. And the question is, as a judge, what can you do to have an impact on institutional racism and or promote anti-racist behaviors?
Well, there are sort of two different levels you can do, things you can do individually in your own decisions, and then secondly, in your role and working with your fellow judges and reviewing the policies and procedures that the court follows. I have a specific proposal actually before the judges now that we're going to take up at our October 7th meeting to change our cash bail system, to change the wording of Criminal Rule 3.2 to make it so that a judge has to affirmatively find that there is an actual basis to believe that that the defendant is likely to engage in violent behavior, witness intimidation, or flight in order to impose something other than personal recognizance on them. That shifts the burden to make sure that there's an actual basis for doing that rather than just rubber stamping what a prosecutor is proposing. At the individual level, a judge has a sentencing philosophy, and my approach has always been dealing with nonviolent crimes to look at how can I solve the problem. I'm looking at options for treatment, for substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, anger management, something that is likely to prevent this problem from reoccurring rather than causing more problems by imposing significant periods of incarceration. So that kind of thing and minimizing the impact of legal financial obligations helps prevent the the institutional racism that is involved in the just sort of standard operating procedure of the criminal justice system.
Ms. Ladd.
I want to talk about a decision issued by a federal judge, a federal trial court judge in Mississippi in October of this year. The judge's name is Carlton Reeves. He issued a 72-page order in August that received a fair amount of media attention and a lot of attention by lawyers and judges. And that's because he wrote about something that he sees as an inequity, and he called on the United States Supreme Court to change the law. As a trial judge, he's bound by Supreme Court precedent, but he doesn't think it's right, and he called it out. So the case is about a gentleman named Clarence Jameson, an African-American man who was driving a convertible Mercedes home from vacation. So he started in Arizona and he was driving home to South Carolina, but he's stopped by a white policeman in Mississippi who lies to him and tells him that he's been told that he has drugs in his car. The policeman keeps him on the side of the road for 2 hours, rips his car apart, brings in a drug dog, and there are no drugs to be had. Mr. Jameson bought that car with his own hard work. He's a welder and earned the money for this convertible Mercedes. So Mr. Jameson sues the police officer to recover the damage to his car, but also emotional distress damages. And what Judge Reeves said is the doctrine of qualified immunity does not allow me to allow the plaintiff to recover damages, but he thinks the doctrine is incorrect, that there needs to be accountability for police officers. And so he wrote this opinion naming 19 African-American unarmed people who've been killed by the police in a way that I've never seen a judge do before. And he called on the Supreme Court to make change and to eliminate the doctrine of qualified immunity. And I'm seeing the pink card.
I'd asked the question as to what your position is on the Black Lives Matter movement. And there's some folks from the audience that want to know, what is your position on the Blue Lives Matter movement? I think asking you sort of the opposite end of the question. So I think it's only fair that we ask that question. And we will start with candidates for position 30 with Ms. Ladd.
So to me, those are not an equivalency. Blue lives referring to police, and police are important and are also entitled to equal protection under the law. But being a police officer is a job. You aren't born as a police officer. There hasn't been 400 years of discrimination against police officers because of the color of their skin. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is very important in addressing the historical racism that we've had in this country. And as Judge Reeves pointed out in his opinion, far too many unarmed Black people have been killed in this country, and it's something that we need to address.
Mr. North.
Well, I agree. There isn't an equivalency. Unfortunately, people bring up Blue Lives Matter, and it's like it's a way of negating the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement by missing the point of it, which is the fact that there has been this 400 years of discrimination against African Americans in this country. Obviously, it is important that policemen have the equal protection of the laws too, but talking about Blue Lives Matter misses the whole point of the ongoing discrimination that has existed for hundreds of years in this country against people of color.
Now turning to the candidates for Department 13, Ms. Mattson.
Thank you. I thought that Ms. Ladd gave an amazing answer, and there's not much that I can add on top of that, except to say that I think a good example of this problem would be when someone says, I care about breast cancer, and they wear a pink ribbon. It's not saying they don't care about lung cancer. And I really think it's so important that we don't create an equivalency, that we don't say it's one or the other, because in the end, just like the mission of the NAACP is to advance the rights of all people, we want all people to be safe and to go home to their families at night.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you. As the other candidates have said, I think we all know what it's really designed to say, and that's to undermine the Black Lives Matter movement. And what it seems to stand for is the proposition that if you're in favor of the Black Lives Matter movement, that you're somehow anti-cop. I happen to believe after 22 years of cross-examining officers in court, the police officers have a very, very important job, and they need to be held to the highest of standards. And the officers who I know who have actually engaged in a great deal of self-reflection and have looked at the problems in their brethren and didn't simply stand behind them regardless of what they do are the true honorable police officers that are out there. I've had one of the highest compliments I've been paid is to have officers come up to me after I have basically undermined their entire investigation on cross-examination and to shake my hand and to say, thank you for making me a better police officer. And those are the type of officers that we need to have out on the force. And for someone to say that Blue Lives Matter means that you need to accept everything that is done by a police officer without looking at the years and years of racial profiling, of racial discrimination in policing conduct, you simply cannot tolerate using that movement to undermine a Black Lives Matter movement that is critical and needs to be at the top of our conversation now.
As we are nearing the end of our time, my next question, I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer. Have you ever served as a judge before? And regardless of what your answer is, why is it that you think that you were prepared to serve as a Superior Court judge for King County? And we will start first with candidates for Department 13, Ms. Mattson. 1 minute.
So I trained as a pro tem judge in Tukwila Municipal Court. And due to COVID, I haven't been able to go down to that court to oversee any trials recently. What have I done to prepare to be a judge? Well, I've learned the mechanics of trial. So I've appeared in trial in 4 substantive areas of law: dependency, family, civil, and criminal. I've worked on appeals. So that means I've had the opportunity to go through trial transcripts and identify errors or mistakes that have been made by judges. And I've had the opportunity, more than the mechanics of law itself, I've had the opportunity to focus my career on people who are poor, people who can't afford to access our legal system, to understand the perspective of folks who are pro se. And that's a big deal in the King County Superior Court, where most of the work of the court is civil and the bulk of that is domestic. And we know from national research that 80 to 90% of people who appear in court appear pro se in family law matters.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you. 5 years ago, I went through a weekend structured pro tem training program. Justice Gonzalez spoke, Melanie Dane, Justice Paja from Island Court. It was a wonderful experience. Unfortunately, at the end, it was made clear to us that if we were to serve as pro tem judges in King County District Court, that we would have to forego appearances in that court in order to avoid any conflict of interest. As I am an attorney who runs my own practice with my husband, and I'm the primary breadwinner for our family, Giving up a substantial portion of my practice was simply not financially feasible. So unfortunately, I was not able to accept pro tem engagements after that training. However, what I have done is spent 22 years in the courts and thousands of hours observing court, looking at judicial philosophies that are engaged in on a regular basis, having lengthy conversations with colleagues of mine like Bill Bowman, Roger Rogoff, Steve Rosen, Aimee Sutton, all of whom started as criminal defense attorneys and now sit on the bench. I'm learning a lot from these discussions, and I know a great deal from my 50 jury trials, and I'm ready to take the bench and serve in that capacity.
Candidates for Department 30, Judge North.
Well, I've been a Superior Court judge for the last 20 years, so I do know how to do that. And I do think it's important that people understand the importance of experience, particularly in having tried cases and being able to do that work. It's not like an appellate court where you have time to sit back and think about things and write opinions and so on. In trial court, you're called upon to make immediate rulings on evidentiary issues. You need to know the rules of evidence back and forth, backwards and forwards. You need to know procedure. You need to have an innate sense of how to deal with people in court on a day-to-day basis. And there's no substitute for a lot of trial experience in being good at being a trial judge.
Ms. Ladd.
Yes, I have served as a pro tem judge or a temporary judge. It's much like a substitute teacher. When the elected judge needs to go to the dentist or a continuing education course, someone needs to fill in for that judge. And so I've served in Kitsap County District Court, which is both civil and criminal. And I've also served in Seattle Municipal Court, which is all criminal. I've also attended the Judicial Academy at the National Judicial College in Reno, Nevada. So yes, I do have experience serving as a pro tem judge, and I feel that I'm ready to serve on King County Superior Court.
As we come to an end, I'm going to allow each candidate 2 minutes to give their final closing argument or closing remarks for this panel. And we will first start with, we'll go the exact opposite way in which we started. So we will start first with candidates for Department 13. We'll first begin with Ms. Madsen and then Ms. Robertson. 2 minutes for your final closing remarks, and this will be your last word, so make it count. Ms. Madsen, the floor is yours.
No pressure there, Mr. Sims. So my closing remarks. There are a couple of things that I think make me stand out as a candidate for the King County Superior Court. The first is in my career choices. So I've made the choice over and over in my career to put people over profit, to represent children and youth, to represent people who are incarcerated, to represent immigrants. The other thing that I think stands out in my experience is the pro bono work I've done. And so, for example, one of my key pro bono projects right now involves the First Clinic, where we represent pregnant women and new mothers who are at risk of child welfare system involvement. Because when wealthy parents are investigated by CPS, they get attorneys immediately. When poor parents are investigated by CPS, they can't have an attorney provided to them until their child is actually removed. So that's important work that I'm doing that's pro bono. The other thing that really stands out is my community service. And so I'm a mentor in the IF Project, which is a program for women who have been incarcerated at WCCW. I'm a mentor with the Latino Development Organization, which is a program at the Monroe, which is one of our men's prisons for people who identify as Latinx. And then I also serve on the board of the Children's Alliance, which is a local nonprofit organization focused on infusing race equity conversation into public policy debate. These are the things that make me the best candidate to bring reform. As I've discussed, I have broad legal experience, and I'm also committed to hearing and seeing from the most vulnerable people in our community, just as I have throughout my career.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. Ms. Robertson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate forums like this. I think it allows the average voter to become more informed about a race that for some folks is so far down on the ballot that they will often skip it. They'll feel unqualified to make a decision regarding who should be a judge, because it's not just about platitudes and statements regarding laudable social goals, but it's in fact, an important part of this is assessing whether the person is experienced and qualified to actually fill this role. And in this case, you don't have to take my word for it. I am the only candidate in this race who's been rated exceptionally well qualified by any bar association, let alone 5 bar associations who've rated me with the highest potential judicial rating that shows that I'm qualified and ready to fill this role. While some of the social goals that may be pursued by my opponent in this race are laudable, my experience far surpasses my opponent in every way, shape, and form in terms of my ability to handle trials, my presence in a courtroom, the thousands of hours that I've spent fighting on behalf of the accused and victims of violence and harassment. And you, again, don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the associations who have engaged in a rigorous ratings process and have made the conclusion with the highest potential rating possible for a judicial candidate. I feel that I am eminently qualified to fill this role. I'm very much looking forward to taking the bench, and I would respectfully ask for your vote. If you're curious about any other information about me, my website is andreaforjudge.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. I now turn for final closing remarks to the candidates for Department 30. Mr. North, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think it's very important in looking at somebody who wants to become a judge at the history of their career in getting there, and do they understand the position of people who are coming before the court as individuals. And that's important that an attorney has represented people who have been injured on the job, who have had been injured in a car accident, or have gotten the short end of the stick in a dissolution, that is a divorce case, and have had to work with that client to try and obtain justice in the system. Because that was the kind of practice I had before I came to the court, and because I know what it's like to represent folks in those situations, I've been endorsed by 4 labor unions. I'm the only candidate in this race that has represented individuals seeking justice and fought for their rights in court. I have a great passion for justice, which inspires me to thoroughly prepare for each day's hearings. I'm determined to treat everybody who appears before me with dignity and respect, provide a fair hearing and a reasoned decision. I would be honored to continue to serve the citizens of King County as a Superior Court judge.
Thank you, Mr. North. And Ms. Ladd, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
As I started out the evening, I am challenging an incumbent who's been on the bench for 20 years, and I'm challenging him because he was sanctioned by the Commission on Judicial Conduct for saying that Black people are more likely to be gangsters than white people. And I appreciate the question from the audience member about how can the public and how can particularly communities of color have confidence in a judge who's been sanctioned for making a racially biased comment. There are 6,000 felony cases that have been backed up because of COVID-19. And my question for the voters of King County is, who do you want to handle those questions, to handle those cases? I've been an attorney for 30 years. I do have experience as a pro tem or substitute judge. I've been rated exceptionally well qualified, which you've heard is the highest rating by 2 independent bar associations. I would ask you to consider if you think the current justice system is fair, particularly to communities of color. And if you think it is, then maybe Judge North is your candidate because he's been a part of that system and the establishment for 20 years. But if you want change, if you believe that the rule of law matters, that the law applies equally to everyone, if you believe that Black Lives Matter, then I would ask for your vote when your ballot arrives in October. And I would ask you to look at my website, carolynladdforjudge.com. And thank you very much for the opportunity to participate this evening.
All right, and that brings us to a close. And on behalf of the Seattle King County branch of NAACP and its amazing president, Ms. Carolyn Riley Payne, I want to thank you, the candidates, and thank you all as well for watching and participating in this judicial forum. I also wanted to remind you that throughout the rest of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, no, not Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we will have judicial forums, same time, same login information. On Tuesday, there will be a candidate forum rather for the 37th district. On Wednesday, there'll be a candidates forum for District 11. And on Thursday, there'll be a candidates forum for District 30. So there'll be some amazing conversations happening throughout the rest of the week. At the same time, 6:30 to 8 each evening. Additional information can be found at, let me make sure I get this right, Seattle King County, NAACP.org. Seattle King County, NAACP.org. And as we bring this conversation to a close, remember that they have heard our voices on the street, and it is now time that they feel our voices by way of the vote. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you all at a future panel. Have a good night.
Good night.